The following video is an illustration of the task in hand. If you prefer to have us do the job, please contact Emma or Rob at Amazon Cars. So, let's rebuild the Volvo M40 gearbox. This is almost identical to the M41 overdriven unit. The only difference is going to be that instead of having the flange at the back and the bearing housing, it's going to have an extension housing that has to be removed here. Otherwise, the two gearboxes are absolutely identical. So, we've removed the gearbox top. We take out the 3 detent springs. There's still the detent balls sitting there. Don't forget those. They'll come out later. Okay, off with the flange. And now we just pop out the small top hat seal from the speedometer drive. Undo the pinch bolt. And remove the copper washer with it. Then we use an old speedometer cable. We attach this to the speedo drive and yank on it. And lo and behold, the speedo cable comes out. Okay, so we'll use a pair of pliers. Out comes the housing and the nylon speedo drive. Pop off the O-ring from the speedo drive housing. And discard. Now we take off the end cover for the selector shafts. And on the earlier gearboxes, this also contains the reverse gear switch. If that spring is heavily bent or even sometimes corroded and broken off, then replace it. Now we take off the front housing screws. Now each of these screws has an O-ring and often that will actually stay in the housing. So we've just inspected it, it's not on the bolt, so we just screw it in a little bit, which will engage in the O-ring and then pop the O-ring out. And discard. Now we take the selector shafts out. So we have to undo the clamp screw that holds the selector on the top of the shaft. Now we have a very high quality screwdriver that has a hexagonal top end to it, so we can get a ring spanner on it to be able to snap that screw free.
And the reverse selector. You don't need to take the screw out entirely, you just have to slacken it off in order to get the shaft out. Reverse shaft and reverse selector comes out. Third and fourth shaft comes out. Now we knock the roll pin down so that the first second yoke can come out. Now, as this goes down, you've got to be particularly careful not to foul the synchro ring that lies beneath it. So get it going, then inspect it with your lamp. And you just have to rotate the output shaft a little bit just so that the pin can go between two teeth on the synchro cone. Again, the pin doesn't have to go all the way through, it doesn't have to come loose, just has to go past the shaft. And out comes first, second selector shaft, with the roll pin still attached, allowing you to remove third, fourth selector. Now the first, second selector has separate bronze bushes.
Mm-hmm. No.
So now we're going to remove the bolts from the rear housing. We then just have to rotate that housing through a few degrees. Often you'll need just to tap it lightly with your copper hammer to break it free of the gasket. There it goes. Now the reason we rotate it is so that the lay shaft can slide aft. There's the lay shaft, and it's going to slide out through the gap that you have now created by rotating the rear housing. That's how it was a moment ago when it's assembled, preventing the lay shaft coming out when the gearbox is fully assembled. And tap off the front housing with its seal. To drive the lay shaft out, we have a slightly modified and shortened lay shaft. So this is a slightly narrower diameter than the original and is shortened so that it lies within the casing. You'll see why in a moment. So we carefully drift it in whilst making sure the rear housing stays such that the shaft can come out. There we go, it's coming out nicely now. last tap and it's free. So now we insert the dummy shaft all the way in. Now when we lift the gearbox back up again, the lay shaft should drop down, which then allows us to remove the input shaft and the output shaft. There you go. There's the shaft drop down inside the casing. And thus clearing the gears. Out comes the main cluster, complete with its synchro ring at the front there. And then jiddle out the input shaft. Now usually when this happens, you end up losing a few of those roller bearings from the input shaft down in the bottom of the gearbox. And there's the lay shaft, neatly lying in the bottom of the gearbox. Out comes the lay shaft. Watch out for the end spacer ring that goes on that lay shaft. They can often drop out as they come out. And also the copper thrust washers at each end. The front one's out and there's the rear one. And that's just getting those input shaft bearings out of the bottom of the casing with my favourite magnet. Finally, just got to remove all the gaskets from the casing. We use a razor blade for this. And that's the gearbox completely stripped down. So your M40, M41 is now stripped out, ready for rebuild. So we clean the casing thoroughly and all the components before going to the next one. So we're left with the front seal there and the main cluster and the selector rods, the lay shaft, the lay gears and the front shaft and bearings.